was this the cat I did before? Maybe it was. So external nares are the nostrils. There you go. You see them right there. Oral cavity. You open the mouth, you can see that there's the oral cavity. That's about as far as we're going to get. We're not going to cut stuff open to see stuff further back, but that's oral cavity. Oral pharynx. So you can scratch that out. Oral pharynx is something you'll have to know because, as I said before, it's going to be back further, and we're not going to get back there. Trachea. Trachea is right here. So that's the trachea. You're already familiar with that, probably. Larynx. So larynx is where vocal production occurs. It's going to be this area right here. This is actually thyroid cartilage, so this entire area right there is the larynx. So vocal production occurs here. And what I had somebody, I think this is the one I did before. Maybe was it on Tuesday, the same cat? Was it the same one? So if I put my, Kelly, have you touched this cat yet?
Not that part.
Really? Oh, you got your gloves on, but what I want you to be careful because the teeth are sharp. But what I want you to do is, there's the thyroid cartilage, and what I want you to do is kind of feel up here, and you'll feel a little bit of a ring or a ridge right there. Feel that for me. You feel it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's hyoid bone. So you've got hyoid bone here, thyroid cartilage right there, and then the cricoid cartilage or cricoid cartilage is this cartilage right here. Then the tracheal rings come down from that. So what I did very quickly on the Tuesday group is I simply grabbed the scissors, stuck them in here, reverse scissor technique, opened this area up, and you'll see now when I pull this back, there's a little flap. And that little flap right there, see the flap right there?
Mm-hmm.
That flap is the epiglottis. Okay? So what the epiglottis does is it closes the glottis, which is the opening between the two vocal folds or vocal cords during swallowing. Because what we don't want to have happen is have solids or liquids end up down in the trachea. It causes us to sputter, cough. I mean, it's pretty bad. We've all had that happen before. If it gets down lower into the lungs, then we would call that aspiration, or if a significant amount got in the trachea. So we don't want that to happen. So that is epiglottis. So larynx, we talked about that. Thyroid cartilage, we showed you that. We showed you where cricoid or cricoid cartilage is. Epiglottis, we talked about that. Hyoid bone, we talked about that. Next thing you got is the vagus nerve. Now the vagus nerve sets, I don't see it on this side, but it's still intact on this side, and that's interesting because this is the side that gets cut for the injection. So the vagus nerve runs with the internal jugular vein and the common carotid artery. So common carotid artery is the red thing, and then the white thing right there, that's vagus nerve. Okay? Primary bronchi, they're kind of hard to see because when you take the trachea all the way down, then where it bifurcates or branches to go into the lungs, those will be the primary bronchi. They're hard, as I said, they're kind of hard to follow them into the lungs. So I won't ask those, we won't ask those on the test either. Pleural cavities, of course, the pleural membranes are the membranes, just like when we talked about with the pericardium. We have the same type of membranes that the lungs are surrounded by. So the part that comes in contact with the lungs themselves would be the visceral pleura. The part that comes in contact with the inside of the thoracic wall is going to be the parietal pleura. Okay? Parietal pleura, visceral pleura. The space in between those two layers is going to be the parietal, or excuse me, the pleural cavity. Covered that diaphragm. Of course, this is the diaphragm right here. This is the diaphragm. So everything above that's going to be thoracic cage, everything below that's going to be abdominal cavity. Phrenic nerve. All right, so the next thing we want to show you, we showed you the vagus nerve. This is vagus nerve here. When the vagus nerve gets down into this space, it's hard to follow, hard to find, because it actually sends these spider-like web-looking nerves that wrap around the esophagus and then down into the aorta. So you really won't see vagus nerve in the thoracic cage. What you will follow, though, will be the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve continues down, and I can see a little bit of it. I think I can see it right here. Yeah, there it is. The phrenic nerve is this little bitty nerve right here that goes down. There's two of them. There's one that goes down on the left side to the left side of the diaphragm, and then there's one on the right side, which is, no, they did dissect it out. So the other one coming down is going to be this dude right there. So that's phrenic nerve on the right side. Okay? And of course the lungs. Lung. Dissect your cat, describe dissections, responsible for parotid. So the salivary glands are going to be up in here, and I know they didn't do a lot of dissection, but this is actually, looks more like a lymph node. We won't be able to tell until we actually get it dissected out. But the parotid glands, the salivary glands are going to all be up in here. The way I like to describe it is the ear sets here. They're going to set anterior to the ear, so they kind of set in this region. So I think maybe we got a cat or two that they've cut and dissected, and you might be able to see them in this area. If you want, you guys can do the dissection as well. If I see good parotid glands or salivary glands, I might put those on the test. If not, we won't. Okay. And the way they kind of set up on cats, a little bit different than in humans, but the parotid glands are the big ones out here, and then they kind of taper down into the submandibular and then sublinguals down further, and they taper to nothing. So they actually kind of set like a comma. So the comma's got the bulb in the top and it curves downward, and that's where these kind of present. Teeth, we know what teeth look like, right? Teeth, that's a tooth. And we have hard palate. Hard palate is this area right there. I did this before with the other group, but if you look in there, you see the ridges on the top of the mouth, Kelly? Mm-hmm. That's hard palate right there. And then if you look at the tongue, do we have that yet? Hard palate, soft palate. We won't be able to see the soft palate at the back. Too far back, you can scratch that off. Palatine tonsils, we won't see those. But we will see the tongue, whoops, sorry. We will see the tongue papilla. The tongue papilla are these little bumps on the surface. We've got three types of papilla. Papilla are not the same thing as taste buds. We have three types of papilla, and these actually are called the filiform papilla, the ones that have the long projections on them. And I have to tell my story. Okay, some of you have already heard this. TAs have heard it. But when I was in high school, I wasn't big enough. I played football until the time I got to high school. I wasn't big enough. So during the football season, we were the Littleton Lions, so we had to have a mascot, right? So we ended up getting Rocky from the Nuggets. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't. We actually ended up getting a female 2-year-old African lion from a wildlife sanctuary up in the mountains, and she was trained. She was awesome. So I wanted to be a zoo vet. I followed them around, and eventually the guy said, "Hey, you can kind of help me out." So I did that. But when the lion was first kind of playing around with us, much more like a dog than a cat. Very much like a dog, the way it acted, and it, was endeared to the people that spent a lot of time with. But she would lick my hand, and with all those papilla on there, basically pull your hand into the mouth. And I had my hand like this, and he said, "Oh, don't do that, because if they lick you, you need to have your fist." So it would lick and pull the fist in like this. And the reason why is because a 2-year-old lion is still basically an immature lion, and they still like to teeth. So if she pull your hand into the mouth and decide to bite down, she could very easily, without doing it on purpose, could very easily sever one of the fingers. So I learned my lesson. But the thing that I thought was kind of cool were the filiform papilla. These little bumps on the surface of a cat's tongue are about 5 times longer on the surface of a African lion's tongue. That was a very fun, 2-3 months of my life. Don't you wish you were me? So tongue papilla, lingual frenulum. Lingual frenulum is a little connector between the floor of the mouth and the underside of the tongue. And that's, of course, what we always say is if you're tongue-tied, that's too tight, and you would simply just cut that to release the tongue, and they do that at a very young age to allow the tongue better movement for better articulation. Esophagus. Esophagus is actually this structure. You can kind of see it here on the side. That's the esophagus here. Tracheus here. The esophagus should set behind, but in this case it's kind of on the side. That's esophagus. Let's see what else we have. Parietal peritoneum. So we're down in this space. The peritoneum is like the pleura. The part that lines the inside of the abdominal cavity is going to be parietal peritoneum, and then all the structure that covers all of the mesentery, or all of the peritoneum that covers the organs, this would be visceral peritoneum. And then the part that connects the two areas together, because these are continuous membranes, right, will be considered the mesentery. So this is mesentery here, okay? Stuff you can kind of see through. That's a double layer of peritoneum, isn't it? Mesentery. To kind of help to support and suspend the organs in their proper position within the abdominal cavity. Parietal liver. Liver's right here. This is the liver, right? That's liver. Greater omentum. So the greater omentum is a double layer of mesentery again. So this is the greater omentum. This cat was fairly thin. I'm sure there was probably not a lot of body fat associated with it. The reason I know that is because there's very little body fat in the greater omentum. The greater omentum will accumulate body fat as we gain weight. And this is part of the visceral fat that we accumulate that helps to contribute to cardiovascular disease. We can have a lot of subcutaneous fat, but it's the visceral fat that does that. So as this gains more body fat, the Tuesday group heard me say this, we end up with what we call Dunlop's disease, which is where your belly Dunlopped over your belt. So that's the greater omentum. Don't cut this. There's no reason to cut it. You don't need to cut it. Just let it kind of hang. It'll kind of follow find a place maybe tucked up underneath here, but in this case, you can still see it's attached. Gallbladder. Gallbladder is going to be on the liver. So the gallbladder on this cat is going to be right here. Pull the liver apart, and you can see it right here. Sometimes the gallbladder will be kind of green because of the bile that was in there. It can stain this area, but this one doesn't really have it. So that's gallbladder on the cat. Falciform ligament. Falciform ligament is nothing more than mesentery, just like we showed you here, but it sets in the midline like this, like a shark's fin. It connects the diaphragm to the liver. So right here you can see there's diaphragm, here's liver, and that's the falciform ligament. Okay. Gallbladder, we talked about falciform. Let's see, stomach. Stomach is this big thing right here, stomach, right? Stomach has several parts to it. The cardiac region, or the cardia, is where the esophagus dumps into the stomach. Okay, it's close to the heart, so that's why they call it the cardiac region. That's cardiac region right there. The greater this whole area here would be the body. The greater curvature is along the outside. The lesser curvature is going to be this area on the more towards the back. And then it transitions down into what we call an antrum. An antrum means a room. It's basically where the stomach kind of transitions into this space here. And then it narrows into the pyloric area, and then the pyloric sphincter is going to be this narrow area right here. That's where the sphincter is. It separates basically the stomach on this side, the pyloric region of the stomach, with the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. That's duodenum right there. So we covered that. Greater and lesser curvature, we covered that. So we covered greater omentum. Greater omentum comes off the lower part of the stomach. You can see it right there. There's stomach, there's greater omentum. The lesser omentum goes between the liver and the stomach. So there's still a little bit of lesser omentum still attached to, and you can see a little bit of lesser omentum here as well. Okay. Pancreas. All right. Well, here's what we always say. The first part of the, so we got stomach here. The first part of the small intestine is going to be duodenum. About a foot long in a human, so it's only about this long. What we always say, whether it's human or cat, doesn't matter, the pancreas sets in the curve of the duodenum. So the head of the pancreas sets up here. This is the curve of the duodenum, and you can see pancreatic tissue. See it right there? Remember from before? That's pancreatic tissue. Okay. And then we have spleen. The spleen is right here on the side of the stomach. Greater omentum, that's spleen right there. Common bile duct. Sometimes you can see them if they've been dissected out. I'm not sure I see that it's dissected out on this one. But the common bile duct is going to run from the liver down into the first part of the duodenum. So I'm thinking it's going to be in this tissue right here. We want to be pretty careful. I dissected it out in another cat, but I don't think it's been dissected out in this one. The common bile duct is going to come from, that's probably it right about here. That structure right there, common bile duct. Small intestine, okay. Small intestine has three parts to it. The first part coming off the stomach is going to be the duodenum, about a foot long in humans. And then the last part, before we go into the large intestine, which is this tissue right here, this is all small intestine. This is all large intestine. So the last part that goes into the large intestine right here, this is the ileum. So what we would do on a test is say, okay, if it's near the stomach, we'll say, what part of the small intestine is this? You'd say duodenum. If we're by the large intestine, we'd say, what part of the small intestine is this? And you would say ileum. And everything in between is we're going to call jejunum. Ileum's actually a lot longer. Small duodenum, about a foot long. The ileum is about maybe, in a human, about 8 foot long, and then the rest of it's going to be ileum in between. Okay? Not ileum, forgive me. I'll say that again. This is large intestine here. The last part, this is the ileum. This is about 8 foot long, and then the jejunum is going to be quite a bit longer than that, kind of in the middle in humans. So we go duodenum, jejunum, finally ileum. Then we dump into the large intestine. Now the large intestine, now they've cut it here. There's a mesentery along the back side, but they've cut it. The large intestine in a cat is kind of comma-shaped, not comma-shaped, question mark shaped. Do you see that knee, Genevieve? This is large intestine right there. If I turn it back down, you can see how it's kind of question mark shaped. Okay, it comes up like this, or question mark goes down. So this first part right here, this little part right here is the cecum. That's the part that basically, well, I should say where the large or the small intestine dumps in. So this little appendage right there is the cecum. Then we have ascending colon, which is really short. We have transverse colon, which is really short. We have descending colon, which is really long, which then goes into sigmoid colon, which is this area here, and then rectum down below. So the way I would do this is we'd say cecum, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid into rectum and anus. Okay? Jane, can you turn the page for me? Jejunum, all right. Mesentery, we covered that. Cecum, we covered that. Colon, ascending, transverse, descending, we covered that. Mesocolon, mesocolon. All right. So on it's been cut here. Some of it's still kind of intact. So the transverse colon right here, this part of the mesentery goes back in this direction, and a little bit of it's still attached right there. This is what we would call transverse mesocolon. It goes back towards the pancreas. So this is a little bit of it still intact, but that membrane that sheet would have gone all the way back like this, back towards the pancreas. So that'd be transverse mesocolon or mesocolon. Rectum, anus. Anus is going to be externally. Rectum is going to be this part down in here. And visceral peritoneum, we already covered that, right? Visceral peritoneum, parietal peritoneum. Any questions?